Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. About 10 million people in the U.S. have a serious mental illness that interferes with normal life. Are we letting them down? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Regular hospitals don't have enough resources to care for people with mental illness. People who show up in emergency departments may be held for hours or days in waiting rooms or hallways until a bed becomes available somewhere so they can be treated.
Current treatment relies heavily on medications. How good are antipsychotic drugs? What else should we be doing to help people with mental illness lead normal lives?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn about the Clubhouse model of community mental health.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, results of the T trials are just in and provide more information about the pros and cons of testosterone therapy. Researchers from 13 health systems around the United States conducted 7 linked studies comparing testosterone therapy to placebo for 1 year. The volunteers were over 65 and had low levels of this male hormone at the beginning of the trials. The men who participated in the bone trial had their bone mineral density measured by CT scans at the beginning of the study and again after a year of testosterone treatment. The hormone replacement therapy improved bone density and estimated bone strength significantly more than placebo. This effect was most apparent in the spine, though hip bones also benefited. The study was not designed to determine whether testosterone can also reduce the risk of fractures.
Questions have been raised in the past about the cardiovascular effects of testosterone. 2 studies published this week offered conflicting answers. One of the studies was part of the T trials and included 138 men who had coronary plaque imaging done by CT at the start of the study and after 1 year. Coronary calcification scores were also calculated at both times. Men taking testosterone had a greater increase in plaque volume than those on placebo. On the other hand, their calcification score dropped. These results raise concern but are not enough of themselves to tell whether men taking testosterone are at a greater risk of heart attacks, strokes, or other cardiovascular mishaps. The other study followed more than 40,000 middle-aged men for 3 to 4 years. All had low testosterone at the outset, and all were members of Kaiser Permanente, California. Almost 9,000 of the men were treated with testosterone. The others served as controls. Testosterone replacement therapy was associated with fewer cardiovascular events. That meant they had a reduced risk of experiencing heart attacks, strokes, unstable angina, or death. The results of this observational study contradict warnings from the Food and Drug Administration that testosterone could increase the risk of heart disease.
A small study involving 88 elderly volunteers with nighttime leg cramps tested 520 milligrams of magnesium against placebo. This randomized controlled trial ran for a month. People in both the magnesium and placebo groups experienced fewer cramps with no significant difference between them. The authors conclude, it appears unlikely that older adults with nighttime leg cramps will significantly benefit from magnesium supplementation.
Serum levels of vitamin D make a difference for people with ulcerative colitis, according to a new study from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. The researchers collected blood samples from 70 patients in remission from ulcerative colitis. The samples were analyzed for levels of 25-hydroxyvitamin D, but the doctors caring for the patients were not told the results. A year later, doctors compared patients who had suffered one or more relapses of the disease to those who were still well. people with lower vitamin D levels were more likely to experience a relapse than those with higher levels of this nutrient. The researchers identified a threshold, 35 nanograms per milliliter, that separated the two groups. They hypothesized that vitamin D may help protect the cells lining the colon and promote a beneficial balance of intestinal microbes.
Antipsychotic drugs are frequently prescribed to people with schizophrenia. Such medications may control hallucinations in the first few months of treatment, but long-term benefits are less obvious. Patients often relapse after several years. A review of 18 studies has found that high-dose B vitamins may be a valuable addition to medications for schizophrenia. The authors analyzed data from randomized clinical trials and concluded that high doses of B vitamins helped reduce psychiatric symptoms. The earlier the patient started taking B vitamins, the better the outcomes. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Our mental health care system is in trouble. Emergency departments are overwhelmed with patients who need psychiatric treatment. Hospitals do not have adequate facilities to care for these people. Many are left in hallways for hours or even days. When they're released, they may wind up homeless or in prison. Is there a better way to care for people with mental illness?
To find out what's going on, we turn to Dr. Alan Francis. He's a professor emeritus at Duke University School of Medicine, where he previously chaired the Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Francis also chaired the task force that created the DSM-IV Manual for Psychiatric Diagnoses. He's author of Saving Normal, An Insider's Revolt Against Out-of-Control Psychiatric Diagnosis, DSM-5, Big Pharma, and the Medicalization of Ordinary Life.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Alan Francis.
Oh, nice to be back. Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Francis, you've been helping people with mental illness for a very long time throughout your career, and I'm wondering, as you look back over the last 50 years, how have attitudes and treatments changed?
Well, they've changed for the worse. When I started my career, there was tremendous hope about the community mental health movement. The patients who had previously been warehoused in these horrible snake pit state hospitals could now live in the community, be included as citizens, take medicine, have decent housing. And at first it worked. The trouble is that the different state governments decided to get out of the business of taking care of the severely mentally ill. They sort of abdicated their responsibility. And they made the community mental health centers freestanding private enterprise sorts of cases that put profit over patients. And the severely mentally ill are expensive and difficult patients. The new privatized community mental health centers either went out of business or they redirected their efforts to cheaper, easier people to treat. And what's happened is an absolute disaster. Right now, I think there's no place on earth worse to be a severely ill mental patient in the U.S. We have 350,000 people, mentally ill people, in prison for nuisance crimes, screaming in the night or urinating in public or stealing a sandwich from a 7-Eleven is enough to get you in jail, and the average stay for a mentally ill person is almost a year. We also have 250,000 homeless, mentally ill homeless in the U.S. So we are neglecting, in a way that's just shameful and horrible to witness, people who we previously warehoused in terrible snake pits and now we abandoned to dark street corners without any help.
Well, Dr. Francis, as you were saying, the state decided to get out of the business of taking care of the mentally ill. I was thinking, no, they really just shifted where they were keeping them because, as you point out, so many of these people do land in prison where they really don't belong.
That's a great comment. Number of beds has declined by about 600,000. The number of hospital beds has declined by about 600,000. The number of prison beds has gone up by about the same amount. That's not a one-to-one shifting, but certainly there has been a budget shift from state hospitals, which are a problem, to state prisons, which are in some ways an even bigger problem. Both places completely inappropriate for the severely ill. Around the world, there are many models of how to do this. It's not rocket science. It's perfectly obvious. There are many places that take wonderful care of their mentally ill, and it's very cost-effective. It's a lot cheaper to provide decent housing and access to treatment in the community than to have people in prison. And even homelessness is expensive because the homeless wind up using up lots of medical services.
Dr. Francis, I wonder if you could tell us about some of those models that actually work in other places.
Well, the best place in the world to be severely ill is Trieste in Italy, but there are lots of places, especially in Europe, especially in the Nordic countries. All you have to do, it's really simple, and we had it in the United States 50 years ago, is provide a place in the community where the mentally ill can receive timely treatment when they need it. So if you're having a crisis, an appointment in 2 months doesn't help at all. It has to be timely treatment, timely access. It's nice if you have it in an atmosphere that's also kind of social club. The more the mentally ill are treated like people, the more they act like people. We make the mentally ill much sicker than they really are when we put them in hospitals or prisons or when we abandon them on the street. If you treat them like citizens, they act like citizens. The mentally ill are nice people by and large. Many are productive. And in a sheltered workshop environment in Trieste, they do most of the gardening in the city. They have a cooperative that's been formed. They earn a wage for doing the gardening. The cooperative is self-sustaining economically. Inclusion and housing and timely treatment work. They worked in the United States 50 years ago before we defunded them.
Dr. Francis, I was introduced to antipsychotic medications in the late 1960s when I worked in the neuropharmacology lab of the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute. And the people I worked with, the researchers there, thought that the medications would be a magic bullet for schizophrenia, for depression, for bipolar disease, even anxiety, and that they would get better and evolve as we learned about the neurochemistry of the brain. What went wrong?
Well, let's first of all put it in context that most medicines for most diseases aren't magic bullets. The body is incredibly complicated. And while we've made a lot of progress over the last 50 years in developing more specific medicines for diabetes, hypertension, all kinds of things, there's still a tremendous gulf between promise and need. And the drug companies have been very slow in coming up with better products across the board, and mostly Me Too drugs, to extend patent life and to allow them to charge outrageous prices. Now, in mental health, it's harder because the brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, and it doesn't reveal its secrets readily. And if we have trouble understanding breast cancer when the breast is the simplest organ, imagine how tough it is to understand schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So it's not surprising that it's difficult. There's no low-hanging fruit. That in every class of psychiatric drug, the products that were developed 50 years ago are as effective as the products we have today. The only difference is side effects. So the newer antipsychotics have a different range of side effects, some better and some much worse. So weight gain is a complication of many of the newer antipsychotics. And in fact, the discrepancy in life expectancy between people with severe mental illness and the rest of us has gotten bigger over the years. It's now about 20 years. People with schizophrenia die about 20 years earlier than would be expected if they didn't have that problem. Partly it's smoking, partly it's bad health care, partly it's weight gain from medication. So there's no magic bullet, and the pipeline for most psychiatric disorders is dry. There's not going to be a tremendous advance that cures any of these disorders in decades, if then. So I think what we have to do is provide much better treatment given the tools we have. And that's just a matter of doing it because there's no new knowledge needed. It's just applying the knowledge that's already readily available. And for people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, agitated depression, the medications can make the difference between life and death, a life in prison and a useful life in the community. So the medications are useful. They're far, far from perfect. They have really troubling side effects for some people, but we should realize that they are needed, and we need to provide access to them for those people who definitely need them.
Dr. Francis, what would be your hope and your vision for the future for treating and helping the mentally ill?
I think we have to really recognize the shame of a rich society like ours having 350,000 mentally ill people in prison and 250,000 mentally ill people on the street. That this is barbaric, it's medieval, it's preventable, there are cost-effective ways to switching it. And the trouble is that the constituency has no power. Politicians are not really that concerned about a population that doesn't vote. And I think the only way things change is public outrage. I think it's ironic that the most hopeful signs of improved public support for the mentally ill, adequate treatment for the mentally ill, comes from for all the wrong reasons. So among the strongest advocates and most powerful lobbyers for better mental health treatment are the cops, the sheriff associations, because they're now the first responders to mental illness, untreated people in the community, and they are, I think, understandably afraid that these people will be more unpredictable. Cops should not be mental health technicians. They should be doing cop work. Mentally ill shouldn't be subjected to contact with the police and the correctional system in the way they are. All this could be prevented with, as you suggested, the cost-effective mechanisms of reducing the number of prison beds, increasing access in the community. And we have a large nationwide problem. How are we going to take 350,000 people in prison, 250,000 homeless, and integrate them back into our society when for the last 30 or 40 years they've been abandoned? This can be done. The tools are there. The medication tools, the therapy tools, the methods of social inclusion, and housing first. The first thing you have to do is provide people with decent housing. All these things are obvious, and when you visit other places, it's routine. No one's surprised by the fact that it's possible to treat the mentally ill. People in other countries are amazed that we're not doing it. So I think it's more a matter of political will. It's not a matter of new research. And most of the NIMH budget now, National Institute of Mental Health, is spent on very arcane brain research. And if we've learned anything in the last 40 years, it's that arcane brain research is the most interesting, maybe intellectual adventure of mankind. Learning how our mind works is an amazing, amazing opportunity, and it's wonderful to be alive while this research is happening. But so far, it hasn't helped a single patient. And I don't see anything happening in the next couple of decades in our understanding of the brain. It's going to have a miraculous breakthrough effect on how people are treated. So we have to sort of gather our resources, take on a responsibility which we've neglected, and realize that there's a better, more rational way of doing things, and just do it.
Dr. Alan Francis, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. Alan Francis. He's Professor Emeritus at Duke University School of Medicine, where he previously chaired the Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Francis chaired the task force that created the DSM-IV Manual for Psychiatric Diagnoses. He's author of Saving Normal, An Insider's Revolt Against Out-of-Control Psychiatric Diagnosis, DSM-5, Big Pharma, and the Medicalization of Ordinary Life.
After the break, we'll get an insider's perspective on living with mental illness.
Matthew Cox will share his own story.
We'll learn about the powerful drugs he took and how he found Clubhouse. Matthew will tell you how becoming part of a local clubhouse changed his life.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1069. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
We're talking about the challenges that face people with mental illness in our country today. We've just heard from Dr. Alan Francis about the pros and cons of medication and how the healthcare system has let us all down.
To help us better understand what it's like from a patient's perspective, we turn now to Matthew Cox. He lives with mental illness. Matthew is a Clubhouse member at Club Nova Clubhouse in Carborough, North Carolina, where he also serves on the board of directors. He's on the faculty for Clubhouse Development with Clubhouse International.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Matthew Cox.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Matthew, we understand that you've had to live with mental illness. It's hard for many of our listeners to understand what that's like. Could you please share your story?
Yes, I'll be glad to do that. Actually, about the time I was 4 years old, my mother was diagnosed with mental illness. So I grew up with mental illness in my family. And through my teen years and early adult years, I could sense that there was something different about my mother, although I really never knew exactly what it was until one day my aunt explained to me, my mother's sister, that my mother was mentally ill. And so after that, when I was in my early 20s, I myself was actually diagnosed with mental illness. And that was at a time when I was trying to get my life started and trying to go in the direction that most people do, going to college and forming relationships and all those things that people of that age do. So with all of that going on, I was also diagnosed with mental illness.
How did that play out, if you don't mind us asking?
Oh, I don't mind. What happened was I had, at the time, my sister owned a restaurant in Greensboro. I was working for her. I was attending, I finished my senior year of high school and was attending community college at the time. And I had, at that point, living a relatively normal life with my job and my school, and I had a girlfriend at the time. And then things started to sort of take a turn for the worse. The restaurant closed down. I broke up with my girlfriend. My grades began to drop in school, and I dropped out. And then I was becoming very depressed, self-medicating with alcohol, and I tried other jobs. I couldn't hold down a job, and I contacted my father, who at that time was still serving in the U.S. Army, and he was stationed in New Jersey. And so I called him and said, I'm having a lot of trouble. Can you help? And he sent me a plane ticket. And I moved up there, and that's when I began in my early 20s to get very sick. And I was actually diagnosed at my father's solution to all the trouble I was having was to get me in the Army. Mm-hmm. So I went to basic training, and approximately 3 days later I was hospitalized in the Army hospital and was diagnosed at that time with schizophrenia, which later on that diagnosis changed.
Matthew, we have some pretty powerful drugs when it comes to treating mental illness, whether it's for schizophrenia or depression, bipolar disease. And I'm wondering what your experience has been with some of those pharmaceuticals.
Yes. Actually, my diagnosis is schizoaffective disorder, which for me means that I have an illness that has a psychotic component and also has a depression component. So when I was in my early 20s, I mentioned earlier that I was very depressed and self-medicating with alcohol. The medications at that time that were available did not work as well as some of the newer medications. And in those days, I was on a couple of medications that really weren't working all that well. And then in 1992, in April of that year, I began to take a drug called clozapine, which is one of the newer atypical antipsychotic drugs. And that drug actually worked so well for me that I have not had even one single hospitalization since April of 1992. Also, my mother, whom I mentioned before, also has mental illness, is on the same drug, and she's been doing very well on that drug as well. So it's been kind of a miracle drug for me and for many other people with illnesses similar to my own.
Now, unfortunately, Matthew, in our society, there is still a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. Have you experienced that?
Yes, I've experienced the stigma in different ways. It is typically not very well understood, and it can be very difficult in your places of employment or even schools and just socially, and it can be very very difficult. I think people with mental illness, especially in those early years when they're that young, feel very isolated. They don't feel a part of the community that they live in. They feel rejected by that community. And they feel very isolated and alone. And that, I think, is where the Clubhouse comes in for so many people.
It sounds like you must have felt isolated and alone yourself before you found Clubhouse. How did you find it?
Once I was given a medical discharge from the Army and I came back to North Carolina, and I was in the state hospital in Butner for almost a year, sort of in and out. And in 1988, I left the state hospital with literally everything I owned in a plastic trash bag, and briefly attended a different program in the Carborough area of North Carolina, where I transitioned from that program into the Clubhouse around 1988. And when I got there, I knew that I was with people like myself who had similar struggles, who also had the illness, and I knew that I was not alone. And I formed relationships there that I still have today, and I had many opportunities there through the Clubhouse to get my life back together again. I had opportunities for housing, which I moved into an apartment behind the Clubhouse at that time. Was very grateful to have a place to live. And also had opportunities for employment. The Clubhouse has what they call a transitional employment program, where they develop jobs in the community, real jobs for their members to work for a period of 6 to 9 months, which is when ideally they would transition into their own job.
Well, I'd like to ask you about that, Matthew, because how important is work in general for the Clubhouse model and for you in particular?
Well, for me in particular, I think it was an opportunity to do something with my life. I think for most people, a really big part of who they are is what they do. And when you're in social situations with people, for instance, around the holidays, and they ask you what you do, you're able to answer that question. Many people with mental illness aren't able to answer that question and say that they do anything. So I think that's a big part of it. And also for the Clubhouse model, the Clubhouse is actually a worldwide model that all clubhouses around the world follow the same set of standards. and have the same set of operations that they do and opportunities they provide, and employment is a huge part of that. And specifically the Transitional Employment Program, or TE as we call it in the Clubhouse world, which gets people back to work and serves as kind of a stepping stone to independent employment.
Can you be specific about how it impacted your life and how you're doing today?
It impacted my life in many ways. My first transitional employment job was back in 1990. I got a job at a local hotel as assistant to the maintenance man. And it was a way of not only having something to do that you could call your own job, but it helped in many other ways as well, such as being on a schedule, doing things in an order, and also earning a little bit of money, a paycheck.
Well, since you are on the board of directors at Club Nova in Carrboro, and since you are on the faculty for Clubhouse development of Clubhouse International, it sounds like Clubhouse has become a really important part of your life. Can you tell us what motivates you to put so much of your time and energy into this?
Yes, very definitely. The Clubhouse is a huge part of my life. I like to say that it's been my life's work. As I said before, I left the state hospital with literally everything I owned in a plastic trash bag, and I made my way to the Clubhouse, where I formed all of these great relationships, had all of these wonderful opportunities, had a place to live, and in 1994, I attended what we call 3-week colleague training at Fountain House in New York City, which was the original Clubhouse that was formed in 1948 on the steps of the public library, where a group of people who had gotten out of the state hospital decided if they had a place where they could meet and be together, that they could support one another better and stay out of the hospital longer. And that organization was called WANA, or We Are Not Alone. And then after that, that group formed into what we now know as Fountain House, which is replicated to over 30 countries around the world with over 350 clubhouses. So I went for 3-week colleague training in 1994. And then 6 years later, in 2000, I attended what we call faculty training at Genesis Club in Worcester, Massachusetts. And what that did was I trained to conduct accreditations of Clubhouse model programs around the world, where we go in and we see how the clubhouses are adhering to the international standards for Clubhouse programs. And we look at their employment and everything that they're doing and their work day and everything. And then we give a report before we leave. I have done somewhere over 45 accreditations in countries all over the world, including Australia. I've been to Europe several times, Canada, all around the United States.
Matthew, when you have traveled to evaluate Clubhouse programs in other places, what specifically are you looking for?
What we look for is a few things. We all operate on the same set of standards. They're called the International Standards for Clubhouse programs. And those standards are very comprehensive. They cover a very large variety of things that clubhouses do. We look at that. We also look at their employment program. We have a set of employment guidelines that we go by that all clubhouses use. And we just look at everything that they're doing. We look at what we call their work day or their work order day, and some of this language gets into kind of a language that we use inside Clubhouse that a lot of people outside the Clubhouse world don't understand. And we We just kind of go in, and for a 3-day period, we immerse ourselves in that program and just see everything that they're doing. And then we prepare a findings report, which we give the day that we leave. And then we come home and prepare a final written report that goes to the office in New York City of Clubhouse International, where the staff review that report, and then they finalize it, and then we decide on the outcome of the accreditation for that clubhouse. And there are 4 different outcomes in terms of being accredited by Clubhouse International.
Matthew, where do you think your life would be today without Clubhouse?
I can't imagine that my life would be anywhere near what it is today without the Clubhouse. I think that I would probably be isolated somewhere in a community that probably would reject me or care nothing about me. I don't think that I would have as many or hardly any opportunities to have any kind of a life that would even be moderately normal. And I think I would be lost without the Clubhouse.
Matthew, what would you like our listeners to take away from your experience and the Clubhouse model, especially when it comes to the societal challenges that are faced with mental illness?
I would want people to know that the Clubhouse or the Clubhouse model offers people with mental illness a life. It offers them opportunities to live a more normal life, and also to belong to a community of people whom are like themselves and who have the same struggles and the same societal problems that all people do with mental illness. And that it saved my life, and I think I've seen it save and change many lives. And I think that's what it does, and I think that that's what I would like people to know.
Matthew Cox, thank you so much for coming and talking to us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Matthew Cox, a Clubhouse member at Club Nova in Carborough, North Carolina. He serves on the board of directors there, and he's on the faculty for Clubhouse development with Clubhouse International.
After the break, we'll talk about how the treatment of mental illness has gone awry.
Why is mental illness treated so differently from physical illness?
We'll also learn more about the Clubhouse model for people with mental illness.
How do members support each other? And what's the impact on families?
What policies would be most helpful for those with mental illness?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel utterly soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1069. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
We just heard from Matthew Cox about his experience with the Club Nova Clubhouse in Carborough, North Carolina. There are similar clubhouses across the country and around the world.
To learn more about this model for mental health care, we turn to Pauline Nichols and Dr. Ralph Aquila. Dr. Aquila is the medical director for Fountain House, the original clubhouse located in New York City. He's also the executive director of the Center for Reintegration.
Pauline Nichols was formerly Clubhouse director for the state of Pennsylvania. She was director of development for Clubhouse International for 10 years. Currently, she's the CEO of Nichols Global and Associates.
Pauline Nichols, Dr. Ralph Aquila, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Well, it's very important to talk about a subject that, for the most part, goes under the radar scope for, I think, a lot of Americans, except when they see someone begging for money on the street or somebody is clearly homeless or has clear mental problems. So I guess one of the things that I'd like to know is, how did we go off the rails as badly as we have in this country when it comes to mental health? You know, it just seems like if somebody ends up in the emergency department these days, you know, with a heart attack or a stroke or a kidney stone, they get treated immediately. But if they come in dire straits because of psychosis or depression, they can end up on a gurney in the hall for days, if not longer.
So why don't we start with a quick historical, and I think many of your listeners may be familiar with deinstitutionalization, when we basically shut down all the state hospitals, and we were supposed to take those monies and dedicate them to the community and create services in the community and try to rehabilitate and really embrace the notion of recovery. Well, that happened throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the deinstitutionalization part. The community service part, unfortunately, did not follow. So what you see are a number of people, as you rightfully pointed out, on the streets who are not getting any treatment, and psychosis in particular, when left untreated, is a disaster that leads to all kinds of terrible things.
Dr. Aquila, why is mental illness treated so differently from physical illness?
Well, I think we've made some significant progress in the rest of medicine in the last 50 years, heart, kidney, lungs, etc., even cancer in some respects. I think the brain is truly the last frontier. I think we're having a hard time still identifying what exactly goes on with the brain. And unfortunately, we don't have a blood test. We don't have an X-ray to determine the diagnosis of schizophrenia or the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, to name two of our most serious mental illnesses.
Pauline Nichols, you've worked for Clubhouse International. You are the former Clubhouse director from the state of Pennsylvania. I think many of us are wondering, what is Clubhouse and what does it have to do with mental health?
So clubhouses are communities of individuals living with serious mental illness, many of whom live independently in their own apartments in the community. And it is a facility that replicates any standard business operation. It is a place that is safe and welcoming for individuals to come to on a daily basis. Clubhouses are open 365 days of the year. We celebrate holidays on the holiday. And there are facilities that are around the country. There are more than 400 in 34 countries. We serve about 55,000 individuals every day and about 150,000 individuals every month. And we help people get their lives back on track, go back to work, go back to school, have a nurturing community, rebuild relationships, and move forward with your life. And so that means different things for different people. They're often in the middle of a suburb where no one would expect them, in an inner city. And an individual can apply, become a member. You're not a client, you're not a patient. There are no clinical services inside the facility, but we work very closely with clinicians in the community to make sure that our members get the services that they need, adequate housing, decent, affordable health care, and a job. So we are a comprehensive one-stop shop community center that services people living with serious mental illness.
Now, Pauline, you mentioned a job. How important is work for people who have mental illness?
The very way we define ourselves in Western culture is by what do we do. If you and I met at a party on Saturday night, I would learn instantly that you're a radio show host or you're a grandmother, or the way we define and describe ourselves is by our ability to be productive. That's no different if I have any illness, let alone a mental illness. So what we do is find a way to help people very gently go back to the workplace with a supportive system, and then help them find their career path once they are stable with their housing and their medication and are ready to live out a perfectly regular life. 85% of individuals living with a mental illness in the United States today are unemployed. And through our model, more than 50% of the folks on a daily basis have gone back to work. The numbers for going back to school are huge. So in the state of Massachusetts, in the last couple of years, Clubhouse members have earned over $20 million a year. That makes them productive citizens. It gives someone their life back, their independence, and their ability to participate in society.
What I find fascinating about this concept is the self-support and this level playing field between staff and members. So I guess the first question I have is we've all heard about, support groups, cancer support groups, cardiac support groups, lots of support groups. Very few of our listeners have ever heard of support when it comes to mental illness. I'd like to get a better sense of how, I won't call them patients, how members support other members in dealing with work situations or social situations or just financial situations.
Okay, so there are no groups in a clubhouse. There are functioning work areas. And while you're collating a newsletter or stuffing a mailing for 1,000 people, someone will bring up the fact that their doc has put them on a new med and, they're not quite sure about it and they're having some issues, or they're worried about losing their benefits if they go back to work. There are not enough staff in a clubhouse to carry out the work. The members are working side by side, and who to give better advice about how to deal with Social Security or benefits, or how to talk with your doctor, or I tried this medicine, or I went to this place, but someone who's experienced that situation, who knows it firsthand. And you would be amazed at the dialogue that happens while we're doing something constructive. We don't just sit around discussing a problem. We're there working together. The work is therapeutic. Participating is therapeutic. And the level of camaraderie and support and community that is built is enormous.
All this must cost money. Where does the funding come from?
So this costs surprisingly less than traditional care. For between $45 and $65 a visit or a day, those services are provided. In the United States, they are free to members. Some of the work is billable through Medicaid, Medicare. Much of the money from Fountain House is raised but from private sources.
I'd say about half for the Fountain House proper is raised from private sources.
Which is about $4 to $6 million a year that's raised privately in New York City. The average clubhouse budget is in the U.S. is between $500,000 and $600,000, and the average cost per visit is $45 to $65 a day versus almost, I think, 1 week of hospital stay in North Carolina would be the equivalent of 1 year's membership for one member at Club Nova in North Carolina. The cost of jail time, the largest mental health population in the U.S. today, are in jail. The cost of community hospital and the cost of state hospital in the state of New Jersey is over $365,000 per patient versus somewhere between $14,000 and $20,000, depending where you are in the country, for a year of our services. We reduce hospitalization sixfold. We have empirical data that proves that. We get people back to work at 3 times the rate of any traditional programming. And we seriously reduce incarceration and homelessness.
Pauline, I'd like to ask about the impact of mental illness on families, because it seems like there are probably millions of families that are touched by people who are severely depressed in their family or even schizophrenic. And that toll affects everybody in the family. The question is, how would families find a clubhouse in their area that would help ease the burden?
You cannot underestimate how this affects families and family life. And too often we don't meet a member until they have become alienated or separated from their family. In terms of what families can do, they can go to Clubhouse International's website, www.Clubhouse International, and look at the international directory, which has by state and country a listing of all of the accredited clubhouses around the world. And at Fountain House, we are an international training base. And if there is a family or a group of individuals in an area that wishes to start a clubhouse, we provide training and supportive services to help the development of clubhouses worldwide. In addition, we work in partnership with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I highly recommend courses like Family to Family. We were able to work with NAMI in the United States and introduce them to our clubhouses in Italy and to develop the Family to Family program in Italy. In fact, Dr. Aquila and I were instrumental in introducing the model across Italy. So it's possible not only here in the US, but anywhere around the world. And it's our personal mission and goal to help provide these services wherever they're needed.
Dr. Aquila, I'd like to get your sense of the message to our listeners who think this doesn't really affect them, that no one in their family is severely depressed, and no one has bipolar disease, and maybe there's no schizophrenia or anything even remotely like that in their family. Why should they care?
I want to underscore the message of hope. I want to underscore that people do get better, and not to believe what maybe they've heard, that these are neuroprogressive degenerative diseases, that hope is there. On a national level, I chair the Bear Reintegration Scholarships, and that's not only for people in Fountain House or just clubhouses, but what we've seen over the years for people with both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, we have an 82% graduation rate, 82%, an average GPA of 3.7. So for me, the message that I want everyone to hear is that even if you believe someone has a serious mental illness, it doesn't mean that they're destined to sit around smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. That recovery and treatment, it can make you better, and people can be successful. And that, to me, is the most important point to make.
And Pauline, the message that you would like to impart to our listeners who may be saying, well, this is all esoteric, doesn't affect me, doesn't affect the people that I care about. Why should they care?
It's not true. We all know someone. 1 in 4 families has a person with serious mental illness, and 1 in 5 of us will experience an episode in our lifetime. It may be someone you employ, it may be someone in your family, somebody in your congregation. We all know someone. And I believe as human beings, we have a duty and a responsibility to provide whatever is needed for an individual to participate in society.
Pauline Nichols, what would you like to tell politicians and policy planners and all of the people who control the resources when it comes to mental illness?
I'd like to get them to look at the costs, look at what they're currently spending their money on now, look at the cost of this model. This is a scientifically proven, cost-effective, evidence-based practice that helps people get their life back on track and saves lives, one life at a time.
Pauline Nichols, Dr. Ralph Aquila, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It was our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
You've been listening to Dr. Ralph Aquila and Pauline Nichols. Dr. Aquila is medical director of Fountain House in New York and the executive director for the Center for Reintegration.
Ms. Nichols is the former Clubhouse director for the state of Pennsylvania. She was the director of development for Clubhouse International for 10 years and is currently the CEO of Nichols Global and Associates. For information on finding or establishing a clubhouse in your local area, visit the Fountain House website, fountainhouse.org. Reintegration.com is another helpful website. To reach Pauline Nichols, you can find her on Facebook or LinkedIn. Her last name is spelled Nichols.
You heard earlier in the show from Dr. Alan Francis, professor emeritus at Duke University School of Medicine and author of Saving Normal, an insider's revolt against out-of-control psychiatric diagnosis, DSM-5, Big Pharma, and the medicalization of ordinary life.
You also heard from Matthew Cox, a Clubhouse member at Club Nova in Carborough, North Carolina. He serves on the board of directors there, and he's on the faculty for Clubhouse Development with Clubhouse International.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Redx Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you would like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1069. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
And when you visit our site, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your thoughts on today's show. We'd love to get your feedback.
When you go to the website, you could sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. That way, you can share it with a friend or listen at your own convenience. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
You can also become a friend of the People's Pharmacy on Facebook. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks very much for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.
American Giant makes great clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, and more right here in the U.S. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order with code STAPLE20. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, code STAPLE20.